Okay. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Boardwalk Podcast. I'm flying solo today because Stu and Kyle got caught up in work, but nevertheless, we will carry on. Today, we're joined by Professor Nazif Shahrani. He's the Emeritus Professor at Indiana University for Middle Eastern Language and Cultures and Anthropology. Professor Shahrani, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Zach. It's really a pleasure and to be with you and on your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. As am I. We found you listening to a different podcast. I wanted to talk to you about you specifically were referencing the idea of pluralism in Afghanistan. And for many of us who've been to Afghanistan and people like yourself who are from Afghanistan, it's very different from most of Central Asia in that Afghanistan's not a homogenous nation. There's a number of ethnic groups that have been competing for power and dominance as long as Afghanistan has existed in some form, going back to the days of Bactria. So it's very that's the original reason why we reached out to you. You followed up with me and sent me this literature on the national trust movement of Afghanistan, which I believe is going to be really the crux of what we speak about. So without any further rambling, Professor Shahrani, if you want to kind of introduce what the National Trust Movement of Afghanistan is, and we'll kind of get the ball rolling from there.
When Taliban took over or the power was handed over to them, that's how we perceive it, that Taliban did not win the war, although they claim it, that we defeated America and the NATO and everybody else, and we are sort of victors. And they have been acting like victors in Afghanistan. But the truth is that United States and NATO essentially decided it was time to get out. And unfortunately, the country was handed over to the terrorists against whom the initial entry into Afghanistan was about, that they should have been eliminated and a better governance system should have been helped to be installed in Afghanistan. But it didn't happen. So it's really was disheartening to some of us in Afghanistan to see the Taliban, the very terrorists who were the cause of all the heartache in the 1990s, the later part of it, especially against women and against, all the other groups, that they were on rampage trying to essentially terrorize and take control of much of the rest of the country. And 9/11 happened, and of course, it instigated. Even before then, some of us were asking for the United States to please come and help get rid of these monsters. And of course, 9/11 brought that about, and we spent there our longest war, the United States of America, with a lot of taxpayer money. And at the end, it was left essentially to the Taliban. That really made some of us, the sort of expats, if you like, or diaspora Afghans, very concerned about something needed to be done. So in October 2021, just about 2 months after the country was taken over by Taliban, a group of us started a Zoom meeting. We had a couple of Zoom meetings on Sundays that lasted more than 2 hours each. And we Afghans like to talk about things. And we started talking, but at the end, not much was coming out of the talks. So I proposed that we should perhaps, instead of just talking, should have something to talk about. So I propose that I will draw up an outline of some key issues, and then we'll share it with you. And if you're willing to talk about those, then let's have the next meeting. And that's what happened. I drew up, I think, an outline of maybe about 2.5 pages long, shared it with about 20-something people who had attended the first 2 meetings. And about 13, 14 of them showed up in the next meeting. And we started really talking about this. At that point, we were not yet come up on this fancy title of National Trust Movement. We just simply called ourselves the neutral people, people who were sort of did not have had not taken yet a side, but sort of concerned about the country's future, but we were not members of any political party. None of us had been in the administration of the last 20 years when the United States was in Afghanistan, so that it was a group of people who were clean. Some of us were academics, others were professionals doing other things in all over the world, Germany, England, United States, even Australia, and some from inside the country. So we sort of hammered on. It took us about a year and a half to complete the draft that I shared with you. And then we came up on this title. We said, really, the crisis that is gripping the country right now is lack of trust. Individuals don't trust each other, groups don't trust each other. And because of politicization of identities in Afghanistan, especially during the last 20 years with Karzai and then Ashraf Ghani's administration, ethnic politics and politicization of ethnicity became overwhelmingly a large issue in the country. And that created also huge mistrust in the society. So that we said, well, let's call our movement a movement of national trust in Afghanistan. So that's what it is about. And our proposal is that you cannot come together in any form of, any form of an organization that would be based on trust if you focused on persons. Afghanistan's political culture essentially is person-centered. They reward particularly individualism, and particularly those who are particularly thinking that they're superior to anyone else, and especially those who can also find patrons outside, and then do whatever they want when they have the power, and so on and so forth. So that we thought, if we are to get people together and create any form of trust, we need to essentially focus on ideas, focus on values, focus on a program, a proposal. And that's what we are. We are not concerned about ourselves. We're not focused on ourselves. Now they're left, we were left at the end really with 5 people, because it took us hundreds and hundreds of hours of Zoom discussion to get this piece of paper that you have in front of you. It's 10, 12 pages. 2 pages of it is really summary, executive summary. The rest is the details. But that's what we got. And our aim is really to do three things. The first one is to sort of come up with diagnostics about what is wrong with this country's political culture, the way that we manage power, that produces failed state all the time and failed governments. What's going on? Why is this the case? And then the second thing is, if we have identified what these problems in our political culture are, then what are the solutions? So we're proposing actually one by one, each problem that we have diagnosed, we have also offered some kind of a solution to that. And the third thing that is very critical is that what are the common values of this country? Who do we share? I mean, what do we share in terms of values? Or else, what should be, essentially, what values should be centered in our constitution, in the future constitution, so that we can have a values-based and citizen-oriented kind of governance structure in the country that could help stabilize the country's political system, and that people can not essentially continue, regardless of how much money has been poured into Afghanistan, the country is still extremely poor and extremely dependent on international community for survival, not even for anything else, it's just mere survival. Right now, I know more than 90-something% of the population depends on handouts from the United Nations agencies and other sorts of things, and of course, the $40 million a week that United States of America, or taxpayers' money, goes to Afghanistan, goes in the name of humanitarian assistance, but Taliban are the ones who are benefiting most from that because they redirect it to themselves. So and we have also proposed that this is our roadmap for getting the country out, but we cannot do it. Afghans cannot do it by themselves. We need international assistance, and because of that, we have come up with this three-step proposal of helping with the help of international organizations, especially United Nations Security Council, to form a kind of international peace commission for Afghanistan, who would then help creation of an international peace committee for Afghanistan, who then would have the job of dealing with Taliban, of course, and then eventually creating a transitional government for 5 years and writing a new constitution, new election laws, and hopefully by the end of the 5th year of transitional government, which would be inclusive of Taliban, that we could start a national government system that would stabilize the country and let people essentially govern themselves and try to essentially put their lives back together instead of being harassed by governments as it has been for 140-something years. Because governments in Afghanistan have never been in the service of people. They have been their own people, that is, and they have never had legitimacy based on people's voices or votes. Their legitimacy has always come from outside. Whoever puts those in power, essentially, they come to work for them, not for their own people. So, if you pay, you basically order whatever you want. I mean, the saddest part of it is, I don't know if you have followed in the last 3-4 days in the Badakhshan province, in the northeastern part of the country where I am from, the Taliban went to destroy their poppy fields. And that's triggered a huge demonstration against them, and they started shooting them. They killed some people, injured others. So the province is up in arms right now against Taliban because why are the Taliban doing this? Why they cannot do anything for the impoverished province and the people. We can talk more about that later, but the key thing is that poppies being grown there is because of the poverty, and there is no other alternative for them to survive. And of course, they promised Trump administration in Doha that they're going to fight the production of poppies for United States of America and for international community who obviously would be harmed by the production of this. And so that they're essentially showing to the international community, look, we are doing this, but they're not doing it in their own provinces, not in Helmand, not in Kandahar, but they do it in Badakhshan. Because the Helmandis and the Kandaharis, I'm sure you have been there by now, have harvested their opiums. We didn't hear anything from them. And the Badakhshanis are just beginning, not even yet to harvest, but it's getting close to. So they went there, and it's the Taliban from Helmand and from Kandahar who are there to destroy the local population's poppy fields. And they also disrespect them in the process and abuse them. So they have rose up and they're shot. So there it goes, because they don't care. They cannot, no government in Afghanistan has cared for its own people because they have not depended for the legitimacy on the people. Their legitimacy comes, not so much legitimacy, power comes from outside. Whoever gives them the guns and the money, they impose themselves on their people. And that's what happens, that they work. I think the way former President Trump had said, the Taliban are a war machine and they are for rent. and we're going to pay them the rent, and they will do our bidding. And that's exactly what we're now witnessing.
Yeah, if we were going to do this, if this was going to be the end result, we should have just given them $1 billion back in 2001 for Bin Laden and saved everybody a lot of time and trouble.
Indeed, indeed, if we had done that. But you see, we plan extremely well our military operations. I think the military men have done their task, and they've done it extremely well in America. Where we have failed is the political side, the State Department. They have had no plan, no proposal, no nothing. And they have picked basically some people from Afghanistan for hire, and then let them sort of do as they wish, instead of having a really, like military meticulously plans its operations. The State Department does nothing similar to that, nothing close to it. And they're not even encouraging the Afghans to have their own plans. And believe it or not, until now, no government in Afghanistan has ever had a plan, a thought out plan like the one you have in your hand. This is the first Afghan proposal for how to essentially resolve the crisis in Afghanistan and how to come up with a governance system that might work for the country. You cannot find something like this in the previous history of Afghanistan. No government had their own plan. We have had, for example, in Germany, where is a place where the meeting was held? The United States gathered a bunch of people.
The Bonn Agreement?
The Bonn Agreement. In Bonn, there was nothing. There was no plan at all whatsoever. They just pulled Karzai out of the hat and put him there and said, we propose he should be the head of the state because he is a Pashtun, he's from Kandahar, he is a Durrani. These were really the kind of reasoning that was presented. And none of them had anything to do with proper governance in the country. And the consequences is what we have seen. Some people raise this question: do American interventions in these kinds of conditions truly wishes to solve the local problems, or is just simply resolve them and manage them and then walk out? We need to ask ourselves as citizens of this great country that we have a very, very good political system here for the most heterogeneous society. You remember, you mentioned earlier that Afghanistan is very heterogeneous, ethnically, culturally, and so forth. Just think how how more homogeneous Afghanistan is compared to the United States of America. Who in the world is not in America? What religion in the world is not in America? What language in America in the world is not in America? We are the most heterogeneous state, community, whatever you want to call, on earth. But we're governing ourselves very well. And the founding fathers knew how to do this, and that was community self-governance. Allow for municipalities to run their own government, elect their own officials, hire their own professional staff, let the counties do the same, let the states do the same, and then we together do in the nation the same. Why? And that's how it works. I've lived in Bloomington, Indiana for 34 years and taught at the university. University is run by faculty. It's a faculty, administration, essentially. We hire the presidents and the deans and, all the rest. And it seemed to be working just fine. Our city, we elect the city council, the mayor, and then they hire some judges are even elected. I just in the primary today, I just went and voted actually in the primary, and I think it has fallen. I voted button here. So that's what I'm saying, that what would have happened if we had said you know, we have good experience in governance of very varied society, very heterogeneous society like America. Maybe we can offer some lessons. But as you indicated earlier, some of our clients that belong to a particular ethnic group wanted to impose themselves on the rest of the society. And we, our officials, our government didn't say anything to them, said, just go ahead, do it. And we'll give you the weapons and we'll give you the money, as we have done now with Taliban. I can count to you, no government in Afghanistan ever has been elected by people, even if there were elections held. 1880, the first time a government that led to become Afghanistan, 1880. Before 1880, there was no Afghanistan. Anybody who takes the history further back is essentially dealing in myth making. There was no such a thing. In fact, it was called the Kingdom of Kabul for many years after 1880, when the British crowned Amir Abdurrahman and gave them money and gave them weapons and let them loose on the people. And he massacred hundreds of thousands of people, probably, particularly in Hazarajat in central Afghanistan. He brought them in the name of, again, politicizing religious sectarian issues, and enslaved them and sold them in the market for 20 rupees, all of that. And of course, many other things. And then his son also took money, subsidies from British until 1919. Everything was cool. What happened? His grandson declared the independence, Amanullah. And British stopped the subsidies, the weapons and the subsidies. Then what happened? He lasted 8 or 9 years and increased taxation, increased, and he wanted to do reforms and so forth. There was no money. You couldn't find money from any place else. So he was driven out of the country. In 9 months, an interim government came into his place, a Tajik from north of Kabul. And remember what happened to that. Nobody recognized them, and nobody gave him a penny. In 9 months, he had exhausted the treasury. There was nothing left. And of course, the British gave the next guy weapons and money. That was Nadir Khan, Nadir Shah. He came and imposed himself on the people. He was assassinated in 1933 because of horrible things that he did to people, and a student essentially assassinated him. And then his brothers and his son, Zahir Shah, and then his uncles ruled the country again with the British money and British weapons. And then eventually Cold War came, and they essentially took money both from the Soviet Union and from the United States in the West, until the Communist Party was supported by Russians, by Soviets, to stage a coup, take over the country. And the Soviet Union for 10 years spent billions of dollars, and the communists were basically their agents ruling in the country. After that, when Mujahideen, and of course the Cold War, the weapons that United States give the Mujahideen, and Saudis who give dollar for dollar for the money that CIA had invested in, some $10 billion were apparently spent on the jihad. And that, of course, helped in some ways the Soviets lose the Cold War, and Soviet Union fell apart. I'm not claiming that Afghans did that, but Afghans with the Western weapons were at least effective in some ways in bringing the Soviet system down. And then after that, you remember, proxy wars began in Afghanistan. And after 9/11, we went in with our money. You know this. $2 trillion of our taxpayer money was spent on that war. $2 trillion. And about 180 estimated billion dollars was spent on reconstruction. And of course, Kabul has been rebuilt. Some universities were built, roads were built, And all of that in Taliban, of course, we even funded the Taliban. There is a book by, I don't know if you've read it or not, and I would highly recommend. It was written by a journalist, an investigative journalist from Bloomington, Indiana, of all places. Doug Wissing is his name. And he was embedded with the Indiana, what do you call them?
National Guard?
National Guard, yes. Indiana National Guard. He went there several times, and he's written a book called Funding the Enemy, How the United States Funded the Taliban. It's one of the best investigated books. I've used it as a textbook in my class. So this is the story that Afghanistan's people have never had a chance to elect their own government or self-govern. It has been always outsiders who have picked their individuals, groups, whatever, and often it turns out from the South. And that's the story of Afghanistan, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Pashtun bloc certainly has the biggest impression, and especially in recent Afghan history. So with that introduction, do you want to kind of, I guess we'll start with, the National Trust Movement seeks to establish legitimate elected political system. This right here, inclusive of all the peoples of Afghanistan. That's a pretty, it's pretty standard. What I do appreciate about what you and your colleagues are trying to do with this, Professor, is it's not, it's not Secretary Blinken saying, "Hey, Afghanistan needs to be inclusive." It's 10 pages about how to actually do it.
Right.
And that is a welcome reprieve. As as somebody who, obviously, I don't have the same experiences as you. I'm not an Afghan. I'm not from Afghanistan. I only was there. But watching everything happen after August of 2021 and watching people who had zero skin in the game step up to a podium and say things like, "Well, the Taliban needs to be inclusive. Have you learned nothing in 20 years?" Or really in 28, 27 years, going back to 1994. Like, that was never going to happen. How do we create an inclusive Afghan government, or an inclusive Afghan society, if you will? So it's really refreshing to see that there's some sort of a way forward, or I guess a proposed way forward, right? And that nothing's guaranteed, but at least, if you present a problem without a solution, as my dad would say, all you're doing is bitching. So
exactly, this is what we're not doing. We're not bitching. We're actually offering a way out of the crisis. And you know what? Secretary Blinken wouldn't even take a look at it. I have sent it to the State Department. I have sent it to a lot of people in Washington. They don't bother to look at these things. Tom West, I have sent it to him. I'd never heard a word from him or his office.
Are you familiar with the SIGAR?
Of course, I read them. I read their reports. I have the entire file of them. I have the book that was based on SIGAR's.
Yes.
Sure.
So you've seen where they've reached out to the State Department because they're still trying to do their whole accounting, for money and events. And the State Department said anything that they get now is not part of the Afghan war. So we don't need to disclose any financials to you.
Right. True. I know there are problems with the State Department, but the issue is that those who, from our side, who have been involved in the Afghan mess, including Zal Khalilzad, including Karzai, Ghani, the people who enrich themselves, their families, their tribe, their region, they are not responding. They are still, I think, the ones that Washington hears and looks at them and expects them to maybe, if Taliban are going to be sharing power, it will be with them. But the people have nothing to do with them. They are really people who sold out the country, and that they shouldn't have any rule. That's why we're insisting in this proposal. It has to be done with people who are clean, who are clean in terms of blood and blood stains in their past, as well as any kind of economic corruption that they've been involved, on any other sort of harm that may have they may have caused to the country. We don't even want any political thing. My particular hope is that this proposal will be something that the new generation, the youth of Afghanistan, which make up 60 to 70% of the population of the country today, that it's for them. I want them to support this idea, organize themselves around it, and eventually insist on building an Afghanistan that is not depend politically, economically, and security-wise to outsiders, so that they can, for the first time in the history of the country, could build a bottom-up political system and also a decentralized political system. You see, the worst thing about Afghanistan's politics has been that outsiders like ourselves have helped centralize political system in which one or two or five, sort of gangsters make decisions and has access to all the resources. And those resources are abused through corruption so that it doesn't reach people. I mean, how could you, in Afghanistan, you have seen it, if you had this much money and it was properly managed, the country within 5-10 years should have become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and people should have been wealthy. I mean, $2 trillion war in the country. I know that some of that had to do with our own economy, the military-industrial complex here, that fed out of that. But there was still possibility of a lot of good things could have happened in Afghanistan if we had insisted on a proper, community self-governance based kind of political system in the country, which we didn't. And this is our best asset politically to offer the rest of the world. Community self-governance this is something de Tocqueville was talking about it in the 19th century, democracy in America.
Yes.
And Afghan communities, if they're left to themselves, are actually very democratic. Those basic communities of trust that de Tocqueville was talking about in America, they exist. Mosques in Afghanistan, mosque communities are communities of trust. What did we do with them?
We made it a top-heavy federal government that took away all that democratic ability.
Yeah, ignore that. Ignore the way that people were operating their own, power management, resource management, and we imposed something from the top. You remember, if you were in Afghanistan, I think at some point there was this expression, government in the box, that they would liberate from Taliban some area, and then they would take this sort of build a building, I don't know, quickly, and then take the district administrator and everybody and sort of plump them there.
Yep.
Now you have a government. I mean, that you can't run any place like that.
No.
Government in the box.
Yep. Oh, that was, and so I was there 2016, 2017. That happened quite a bit, especially in Helmand, and then some places in Zabul and Uruzgan. Right. You bring up this decentralized system, and if ever there was a country where a decentralized model of government seems like the perfect solution, it's Afghanistan.
I'm glad to hear that from you.
Well, I mean, you look at it.
That's what I have been teaching, and that's what I have been writing about in my entire career since 1970s. Nobody took me seriously.
It's like you pointed out, right? It is uniquely heterogeneous. Yeah. I think it's uniquely heterogeneous for the region. It's homogenous compared to America, but it's still very heterogeneous. But if anybody just understands the problem set in Afghanistan, you have, it's really 4 or 5 regions, right? You have the southern Pashtuns, the eastern Pashtuns. You have up in the north the Tajiks, the Uzbeks. Out west, you have a little bit of everybody. Then you have the Hazaras in the middle.
Tajiks as well. Tajiks
yes, and the Tajiks
in Herat, Persian speakers there.
Yes, and then you have the Hazaras really in the center of the country, and everybody kind of keeps to themselves. And you look at it and go, okay, how do we resolve this? Well, let's not force people to coexist. Let's let people exist internally within their pockets, and then you from there you obviously have trade relations. You have some sort of a broad national defense structure, similar to what the United States is supposed to look like, where it's 50 unique state governments plus one national defense system.
Right.
Afghanistan could have done that, and you have
Exactly.
34 provinces. I think it was 32 before the war started. You could have 32 unique provinces
Mm.
where they're ran at the provincial level. You have a very small federal government that's really just kind of overseeing the courts and defense. But you point out how comparatively America is very good at governing. The one complaint most Americans have about our government is the size and scope of the federal government. And
Sure.
then we turned around, and by the time Jaroa, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, fell, they had more federal departments than the United States did.
Of course, yes, and free what is that? Independent commissions and all sorts of things, which was a more greater centralization rather than decentralization.
Yeah, well, that's because that's what you.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're fine, and that's kind of where when people ask what does corruption look like beyond, we've mentioned people like Abdul Razik or Adanor,
Mm.
Abdul Rashid Dostum. That's really what that corruption looked like, because what you had was 30 something federal departments when you probably only needed 10 or 15, and you had one person, be it Karzai or Ghani after him, who they appointed one third of the Senate, you know, which they're getting one third of their voting base right there.
Mm.
They appoint
And
a lot of
corruption
these
on elections. Elections are a fraud
absolutely. I
because you're
mean,
centralizing it.
the three of us, when we've spoken, we've said on the podcast, there's no way in hell Ghani won either election. We don't believe it for a second. If they
True.
actually counted the votes, we don't think he won.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But Ghani was, a Western Pashtun educated, professor who was, taught at Cal Berkeley. That's like, again, that's the U.S. getting involved and going, what is the best, what do we think is the best possible solution?
Sorry.
And no,
He was also we share the same field. We're both anthropologists.
oh,
Yeah.
well, that's pretty impressive. I didn't
They,
know.
yeah.
I wasn't sure what he taught.
Anthropology.
Oh,
He is a Marxist anthropologist, actually. And
what
I'm
is
an anthropologist of religion. So there you can see
okay?
where we come from.
Yeah, okay. So I see where the divergence is.
Right. Right.
Um, well, then
Well,
he would have.
he's a good friend of mine, but we don't see eye to eye politically
I'm sure.
and intellectually, but that's a
Yeah,
different story.
Marxist anthropologist. He fit right
Yes.
in at Berkeley. Then he
Well,
was
he did.
at
No,
home.
he actually did his degree at Columbia, and Columbia is one of the best Marxist anthropology departments in the country. No, there are a lot of good, respected.
Sure,
Marxism is not a crime. Marxism is perfectly fine. It's a way of envisioning social reality and managing, but um, it's not so much what the label is, what you do
right.
and how you do it, and whether he wrote even a book about fixing failed states. I mean, come on, you fixed Afghanistan?
Yeah, we've pointed
Why
out
didn't you?
we pointed out he probably shouldn't have written that.
Well, it's sometimes you need to write really bad books as an example. I did actually use it in one of my seminars to show a bad, in fact, inappropriate kind of proposal for fixing something that, in fact, is instead of fixing it, it makes a mess.
Sure.
And in practice, that's exactly what happened. He even abandoned the country.
Yeah.
His post. I mean, how can, as a soldier, you know that, what happens to somebody who abandons his responsibilities in post? Also,
Nowadays they go to jail. So
it's prayer time here. So my Sheikh Google
oh
makes the azan for prayers.
oh nice.
Uh-huh.
So getting a little into the proposal, right? You talk about identifying the problems, and the way I read it, there's four that are laid out, right? Government and politics, economics, education and culture, and external affairs.
Right.
Uh, we've talked a bit about governance and politics, about you know, Afghanistan needs a government that's not filled with corrupt individuals.
Right.
Afghanistan needs to have a government that um, has a greater, the local level has a greater amount of power or authority than
Or at least
at a
no,
federal, or at least some, I
right to
guess.
participate, right to participate in governance of their own communities. Just like, what would happen? You've been in the villages. The villages actually hire their own mosque prayer leader.
Mhm.
They pay for him, they feed him. So he does what the community wants, right? They hire their own cow herds. Each family has a cow or two. So not everybody is able to go and take after their own cows. So what they do is in the morning, they gather them all in one place and they hire a couple of people and each of them pay them something. So they are hired.
Yes.
The same thing in water management. They hire somebody who basically allows people how much right they have for water, how many hours, and all that sort of. So it's a very well known thing. They can also have a village council on certain matters. In fact, they created a parallel government. Going to government, a corrupt government, was always problematic for people. Instead of going to the government, people went to the local shura, the village shura,
Yep.
to resolve their things. So that was a way of sort of avoiding government, not having anything to do with them, was the system. So this is what was essentially weakened. Instead of formalizing, instead of making that, creating essentially rules and regulations to improve those, formalize those, and allow and build on that up so that you could have the same thing at the district level, at the provincial level, and so forth. They essentially tried to weaken them, destroy them, and brought branches of the central government and clumped them in localities. They were essentially sending people by orders. One thing that you mentioned earlier on was it was not just Ghani and Karzai making cabinet posts appointments. They made the appointments of everybody that worked for government all the way down to the villages. And in the process, what they did was they appointed their own kinsmen,
Yep.
their own tribesmen, their own language community, their own region. And of course, they went to places where people didn't know them. They didn't even know the local languages. And that's what created the tensions. And they also took bribes. They, abused people locally. So what we're proposing essentially is decentralizing the political system so that people can, in fact, elect their own political officers and hire or recruit their professional officials needed at the level of the village, at the level of the district, at the level of the province, and also in the ministries. Instead of somebody from Kabul appointing everybody, that these units should have the right to hire their own.
Yeah.
And they can do it. And this can in fact bring about huge change in Afghanistan. And it will be, people will, what we have in Afghanistan actually, and had during the entire history, is subjects, no citizens. The concept of citizen in Afghanistan does not exist. You become a citizen when you have the right to make decisions about political system. You elect people, you hire people. If we didn't have, today, if I didn't go in the primaries and cast my vote, I wouldn't be a citizen. That's what makes me citizen.
Yeah. Having a say is kind of important.
Exactly. Well, that's what citizenship rights are. In Afghanistan, even if you have a citizenship, occasionally in terms of elections, that is actually completely destroyed by fraud.
Yep.
because your voice doesn't count at the end. Somebody that you voted for is not going to win. Someone else, because of fraud, wins. So your voice is non-existent. You're still a subject.
Sure. And I guess in that way, at least the Taliban's not, faking elections. They're just not having them.
Well,
And they're pretty open about it.
Yes, they think they're elected by God. They're chosen by God. They're the guy who is nobody has seen, and it can be only heard. Nobody has, his voice is the last voice.
So,
this is also against the Quran.
So I wanted to
nothing in the Quran that would support that kind of a behavior, but he claims it, and therefore people believe.
I wanted to ask you about that. Just I am not a Muslim. I've obviously spent time in Islamic countries. I've worked with people who are Muslims. I've had employees who are from Afghanistan. I've had employees who are from other Islamic countries. And for the life of me, I'm trying to figure out what makes this Deobandist interpretation, which I guess is more of a Pashto Deobandist interpretation. Why is that? Why does that have to be the law of the land for an entire country that is 99 point something% Muslim already?
See, historically, in Muslim empires as well as modern Muslim states, Islam was essentially managed the lives of people on the basis of its values at the local level, at the local localities. That the village mullah was essentially the primary person who came from the village, or they hired them, and he knew the situation in the village very well. And if they had qadi, the judge in the district center, the judge may have been also somebody perhaps, although sometimes I think in the government system, they would be sent from other places. And people try to avoid that. Most of the problems locally were really solved by local ulama, by local Muslim scholars, and those who were village preachers. That's where a lot of things are solved. And if something was left unsolved, then they will take it to the government. Or it couldn't be solved, then they will take it to the government, and it will be part of the corruption and probably never solved. Islam has historically worked best at the local level. And those values are honesty, justice. Justice is the core of Islamic values. Everything is contingent on doing justice, being fair, and being honest, and acting, according to all the positive values. I mean, this is shared by the Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic tradition.
Yes.
The source all is the same God, the same set of prophets that brought these values. So Islam is nothing really strange or out of the ordinary. It's just they are abusing. See, they're making instrumental use of Islam. Islam is being abused to promote the power of a particular group of people, a particular segment of the society, that it has these guys and those madrasas don't teach Quran. They don't know the Quran. It's commentary and commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries, and all of them are rubbish. That has come to be representing Islam and Sharia. And if you take them, the only thing that matters to Muslims is really the Quran. What's in the Quran and what's the Prophet's authentic hadith. The rest of these commentaries are additions that politicians over the years, with the help of some scholars, concocted and turned it into something called Sharia. And of course, when you centralize this and you pin it on one individual, like this Mullah Hibatullah, nobody has seen, you really are going against everything that Quran stands for. Because we don't know whether he knows the Quran well enough. And of course, part of the problem is the governments did not help educate people on the Quran. And that's why our people are also ignorant of their own faith in the way that they should know. They don't. And I think the Taliban and their regime essentially is taking advantage of that lack of knowledge, lack of sophisticated understanding of what their faith is about, what Quran is about. And that's what I think is bringing this horrible mess that the people in Afghanistan are facing with the Taliban.
Uh, um, and on that, when we talk about Taliban distorting things, I'm going to skip the economic section just for now because I do want to talk about that. But we talk about you guys talk about education and culture, right?
Yeah,
How is it every other Islamic country can send their girls to school?
right.
What have the Taliban figured out that everybody else is getting wrong?
Yeah, exactly. That has been pointed out to them. It's actually not so much religion, is
Mhm.
their own tribal culture, who is against women's rights and women's privileges that Quran and Islam has granted them, that they're basically tying their own honor to the conduct of their woman.
Yeah, but they
And
don't
then,
present it. They don't present it as Pashtunwali, right? They don't present it as the
exactly,
Kandahari interpretation of Pashtun traditions. They present it as
as
Islam.
Islam. Yes, this is the real problem of abusing Islam and using it as a means, as a tool to promote something that is not Islamic, that has nothing to do with Islam as such, but it has to do with their tribal culture, and then presenting that as Islamic and getting away with it, which is unfortunate because they just had, I think, a meeting of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic uh, Cooperation, or whatever they call it. 50 something, 57 countries had a
Mhm.
meeting in somewhere in West Africa. And this issue, I hope, had come up there because the Taliban had a delegation actually attending that particular meeting. And it ended today or yesterday.
Well, that's good that they sent somebody. It's probably not going to amount to much, unfortunately.
Yes. But I think the demand that they made was clear that a woman's rights to education had to be um, uh, honored, and inclusive government and rights of the so-called minorities, because in Afghanistan, as you know, there never has been a census, never a household census. So nobody knows who is the majority or minority. And the governments in the past essentially did not want that census to be taken because they claim their ethnic group is the majority. And
Mhm.
they did not want that to be proven wrong. So we have never, they prevented a census. So the country needs a scientific census
Sure. Yeah, I
so
don't
that we
disagree with that.
know, and it's very likely that Afghanistan is a country of minorities, no majority minority, just plurality.
Yeah. We talk when you know in here referencing problems, paradox of the coexistence of a culture of xenophobia and Westoxification. So that one, unreasonable fascination by things Western. Are you talking about unreasonable negative fascination, where the West does that, so we're not going to do that?
No, uh, it has, of course, sometimes things that the West is doing
Hmm.
can be very positive for themselves, but you cannot blindly imitate those things in another
Sure.
context, and it could be disastrous
Hmm.
and maybe inappropriate. Maybe you don't have the means to be able to do it, but people are fascinated by things Western. And that's why I think one of the Iranian scholars has come up with this term, Westoxification. That is like intoxicated by alcohol. When you are
Ah,
intoxicated, what you do and what you say may not be quite rational. And that's
sure.
the same thing. That's this irrational admiration of some things about the West that these folks engage in.
And then now I want to get into the economy because that's the one area where if I were to objectively, well, I guess I am objectively looking at how the Taliban have ran what they call the Islamic Emirate, I would say the economy is where they have failed the most because
Sure.
at the end of the day, a bad decision, i.e., not letting women go to school, is better than no decision. Because right now, I don't think anybody understands what the economic vision is, or what the Taliban's economic vision is for Afghanistan, other than we're gonna criminalize poppy.
Yeah. Yeah, but that is not theirs either. That's something that their
Right.
outsiders who give them money have asked them to do. You see, Zach, the problem is the state in these societies try to control all resources and make wealth, if you like. In any society where the state is engaged in producing wealth, they are not doing very well at all. Do you know America? Do we produce our government produces a needle?
Our government doesn't make a dollar.
Exactly. So who makes the money? Private individuals and private companies. So in Afghanistan, it's the government that controls all the resources and tries to make wealth for themselves. Whoever is in the government becomes wealthy. You know the term in Persian for state is wealth.
Oh,
Daulat. Daulat
okay.
literally means wealth. So whoever gets into the Daulat gets there to make himself rich and wealthy. And the Western countries, it's not just the United States, all the democratic countries, the states don't make anything. They create the conditions for private people, private companies to make the wealth, and then they tax them. And that taxation enables the government to run its functions. But in Afghanistan, they did not allow essentially private companies, or they work against the private companies' interests because they wanted to make the wealth. The government officials wanted to make the wealth for themselves. So why should they allow someone else? So there is a contradiction there. And if you historically, when did this happen? Was 1668 in England, the Glorious Revolution. And in the book that's called Why Nations Fail by two economic historians out of MIT, they're describing this extremely well. And it's their theory that in societies where governments are engaged in producing wealth themselves, they only produce poverty. In England in 1668, what did the English do? The royal family was involved in international trade. They, in fact, had monopoly of international trade that private people cannot. So the revolution was saying that from now on, the royal family cannot participate in the international trade. Their job is to help the private companies to produce the wealth and pay the taxes so the government can run by themselves. And that's when East India Company was formed. And then they went and produced the wealth and brought wealth to England. Because what's in the, one of the issues that's so important is that it's not the availability of natural resources in a country that makes a country rich or poor. It's the form of government that they choose. In the England, in the English islands, what's there in terms of resources? What do they have?
Almost nothing.
Come on.
Practically nothing.
Then how did they become the richest government on earth?
They know how to resource.
Well, the government allowed their own people to become wealthy, to produce wealth. And government, when they produce wealth in India, they became wealthy there. Government went with its army to protect those companies in India and elsewhere. And the wealth kept flowing to England.
Yeah.
From other places.
On that note, and I'm not asking this flippantly, I just don't know. I would imagine, does the average Afghan realize how much resources are underneath the soil in Afghanistan?
I think this has been talked about greatly, but all of those are not resources. They're just things.
They can be resources, I should
Yes,
say.
they are potential resources, but
Yeah.
that potential resource depends on the forms of government in the country. In the forms of government we have had, has never made any attempt to make those things to become resource.
Yeah,
Taliban are now selling it raw, selling it raw. Just come and take it away. But
yeah,
that's not how it is. You have to process it, and you have to, create jobs. You create the environment in which wealth is produced and produced by the people, by the citizens, not by.
I I follow, I follow, various Taliban spokespersons and stuff on Twitter, right? Part of doing this is kind of keeping tabs on everybody, and to see them post about how happy they are that this bridge that's made out of dirt and that a couple of mules can walk over, and it's like that's their big economic achievement for the week. And I
No.
think to myself, you're 300 years behind.
Yeah.
What are you doing for the people of Afghanistan? Or I guess it doesn't matter because you're still getting millions of dollars a week from the international community from the West who you abhor. They're still lining your pockets.
True.
There's no plan in Afghanistan for economic viability within this current Taliban regime. And as bad as everything else is, to have no plan at all is worse than having a bad plan.
Indeed. Indeed. We're not
So,
going to expect anything like plan from them
sure.
because they have no idea what a lot of things in the country are about, or in governance is about. They should be in the mosques and do what they used to do.
Sure. So we've gone over the problems. How do we solve some of these problems?
I suggested already that the way to address a lot of these problems in Afghanistan is a different kind of governance system. And that's the community self-governance principle has to be taken into consideration. And the state has to be decentralized, so that people can essentially get transformed from being subjects to these people who are supported by outsiders and kept in power by outsiders, that these folks become, in fact, the legitimizers of the new governance system, which will not be supported by outside. We don't want the outsiders to come and appoint our kings and our government presidents and so forth, but rather allow the population to start governing themselves and legitimizing the governance system by building it from the bottom up. And if I think international community can help do that. If they didn't, and they kept essentially picking their particular groups of individuals and imposing it on Afghanistan, Afghanistan will be in the same mess forever. So what we're proposing is really a decentralized governance that is citizen-oriented, with all of its rights and privileges and responsibilities. And that way, what will happen is that people in Afghanistan are, as you indicated, ethnically spread. The East, Southeast, and West are Pashtun. So they can rule their own communities, they govern their own communities. The Herat region can run, govern their own regions. They elect their own provincial governor, also provincial council. All their districts can also elect their own district officers, have district councils, and hire their own people in the way that they need. And they can hire, even if they are Heratis, they can hire Pashtuns, they can hire Uzbeks, they can hire Tajiks from any place. If they hire them, it will be, they will be working for them, just like civil servants here in the United States. But if they are appointed from somebody by Kabul, and then you have the nature of sort of governance that we have had for 150 something years in Afghanistan. The same thing in the north. The Uzbek areas can govern themselves, the Tajiks in the northeast, the Hazaras in the center, so that you get people having a say in how they're governed and who governs them, who serves them as well, not just who governs them, but who serves them. And that's the only way you can find sort of, a new concept of civil service in Afghanistan. We don't have. These are basically people who are in local. We don't have local government in Afghanistan. We have never had local government. These are branches of the central government in localities, which is not the same thing as local governance. Local government is that in Bloomington, Indiana, our local government is elected by us. They work for us. But in Afghanistan, a local governor is appointed from Kabul. He works for the Kabul. Whoever is in the Kabul who appointed them, so he works for them. That's why our proposal is really to constructively destroy the existing structure and replace it with something better. That's what they call constructive destruction of Afghanistan's political culture. We need to destroy the existing practices of governance in Afghanistan, but have to replace it with something better. And that better is bottom-up governance, community self-governance. That municipalities need to govern themselves, and municipalities have neighborhoods. Neighborhood councils need to be there, and people have to, one of the other things that we're proposing is that in the current system in Afghanistan, laws are made in Kabul, laws are implemented by Kabul, and laws are monitored by Kabul. So these three things are in conflict. One organization cannot do these three things.
Right.
So what we're proposing in this proposal that you have read is central government, center in Kabul should make national laws, like the US Constitution, Bill of Rights, and so forth. But they should allow the implementation of these laws to be carried out by locally elected government, by truly local government.
Mm-hmm.
And then the central government should hold on to the right of monitoring that the laws are in fact implemented by local governments justly, just like the United States. Okay, we can do things that could be against the United States Constitution in Bloomington, or in Monroe County, or in Indiana, and if so, we can appeal to the federal government, because federal government is the watchdog.
Yep.
They have to make sure that the federal laws are upheld and implemented appropriately by local government. So this is the whole scheme that we're proposing based on where it has worked and worked well. And the United States is one of those places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Afghanistan is quite ready. The people are ready to do this if the government allowed them to do so. You remember I told you about this opium fiasco in Badakhshan.
Yes.
You know what are those people saying now? Take these Helmandi and Kandahari people who are coming and destroying our fields out of here. They don't belong here. I don't know their language, and they're coming and they're abusing me and doing seeing themselves as superior and so on and so forth. We want to govern our communities ourselves. Badakhshan has its own people. We have in our own district people that who can we rely on, we trust. So this goes back to the game of trust, really. And community self-governance is possible because that's what people demand right now in Badakhshan and virtually everywhere else. but Taliban are sending their mullahs to govern them.
Well, there are mullahs who are, and you kind of pointed out in here, who have no actual qualifications or certifications. They just
Most
call
of
them
them
that.
don't. We want to essentially work on the curriculum
Hmm.
and also revise curriculum, administration, all of these things, so that people who in the new generation who grow up will be healthier in terms of their knowledge, their practice, their commitment to national ethos. Because right now there is no national identity, because this kind of governance system does not produce a common understanding of a society to which they would consider themselves belonging, because they don't.
Yeah.
Everybody is for himself. I'm not saying that Pashtuns are the only ones. All ethnic groups are acting just like them.
Yeah, I mean that's why, part of the reason why the Taliban, this is a history lesson, was able to get to Kabul in 96 is because there was so much conflict in the north amongst the varying ethnic groups who wouldn't work together.
No, that's not true, Zach.
No?
No, there is a map that Newsweek published, I think in 1994 or 95.
Well, I was 6, so I'll
You
take you
were
at your
6.
word.
Okay. I can send you, I can
Okay.
actually share you that map. That map showed at the time how the country, after 20 something years of warfare, had coalesced into governance areas that brought some kind of cohesion locally, like what's his name, in Herat.
Mokan?
Yes, he had five what do you call it? Governorates, provinces, coalesce in one. And Northwest, Dostum had 5 provinces that were, and he even went as far as print his own money and had his own army and everything. And then you had the Hazaras in the center, had their own. Shurai Mashriqi had the eastern Pashtuns, the Ghilzais, had in Jalalabad their own, organized sort of several provinces coalesced in a council. They were about to print actually their own money as well. They had their own airline. They were flying to Kuwait, to Dubai, and all that sort of stuff. So the only play in Kabul was in a mess, because everybody was fighting over Kabul, and Kandahar could not get itself. And of course, the rest was run. The Badakhshan and parts of northern Afghanistan and areas north of Kabul was under the control of, these are Tajiks primarily, who were under the control of Rabbani and Ahmad Shah Massoud.
Mm-hmm.
So the country was a mess, essentially in Kandahar, because they fought each other. And the Taliban rose because of that. And if the Taliban had, in fact, been allowed and encouraged to just basically bring order within greater Kandahar, and then in Kabul, they could have had a weak centralized government. At that point, a federal government in Afghanistan was possible.
Yes.
But what ISI did was, once they saw the Taliban could be utilized for them to have the whole of Afghanistan under presumably Pakistani control, they encouraged them to go and invade other parts of the country. And that, of course, then created what? We liberated our own 5 provinces in Herat. Why should you come and invade me?
Right.
What right do you have? You, or for Dostum, or for the Hazaras, or for the, Rabbani and Ahmad Shah Massoud, or for the Eastern Pashtuns.
Yeah.
So Pakistanis were, I think, the one who did this horror on Afghanistan. Because if you look at that map, it really is very interesting. And at that point, I was saying, if Kandaharis were left, and I think Mullah Omar was about to consolidate his authority in Kandahar to bring some kind of law and order there, because Herat was in pretty good shape. Ismail Khan had even disarmed all of his people. And Dostum was running universities and, with, what's his name?
Adanor?
Yeah, Atanur was also with him on some things or other things with Rabbani and so forth. So Hazaras were they came with a Hizb Wahdat, they united themselves, and everything was looking good at that point if people did not go and interfere with other people's law and order and, whatever they had. Of course, between them, there were tensions, but that could have been solved if a federal government had been agreed upon in Kabul and resolve these tensions. And then you had this consolidation of power regionally. And then you could have called that federal or whatever you wanted, but that was the best time. We lost that opportunity. Unfortunately, no longer is that possible.
I agree that it would be, it's damn near impossible to get what that would have been.
That's why we're proposing within the current administrative structure of 34 provinces that each community, regardless of what their ethnic makeup, the references to local ethnic makeup should be, we should depoliticize identities in Afghanistan and just let them, whoever lives, they all have the right to elect their own mayors, elect their own village headman, elect their own district officer, and their walis, their governors, and so on. And that would essentially help everybody have their say in the decision-making about power and resources in their own localities, and Pashtuns in their own areas, Uzbeks in their own majority areas, Tajiks, and so on and so forth. And that may, in fact, that's how United States is working. I mean, Bloomington is not made up of one kind of people.
Right.
All kinds of people here.
Yes.
It's Indiana. I mean, there may be more sort of, conservative whites and a lot of poor whites as well. But same time, it's a university town.
Everybody's there.
Yeah.
So the question now, like having gone through this, having gone through the 12 pages, 13 pages, and speaking with you, I think the biggest question, right, is what incentive does the Taliban have to play along?
Taliban, if they're left on their own devices, none. That's why they say, well, we have all these weapons left by the United States on us, and people are coming to deal with us. We don't need any. But that's why we have proposed that International Commission for Peace, which is not based on countries, but based on major organizations like the Security Council, European Union, the Shanghai Community, the OIC, and then we have added also World Bank and some other things, that if they come, they need to convince the United States of America to withhold that $40 million a week for a month or two. That will bring the Taliban to their knees. If America really wants peace and security and stability in Afghanistan, that's something that the United States may have to decide on. I was in 1988 in Pakistan. And you remember that time, the Russians, Gorbachev wanted to get out of Afghanistan. And they had a meeting in Geneva. The communist government and Soviet Union were on one side. The United States and Pakistan were on the other side, and they were excluding the Mujahideen. Mujahideen were very unhappy about that. No, we should be at the negotiating table with the communist government. And of course, what happened was that Pakistanis were holding the purse. All the money for Mujahideen was given to ISI. ISI then was distributed amongst the Taliban, against the Mujahideen.
Yes.
What they did was, for a couple of months, they did not pay the sum of their allowances. And then they said, okay, go on whatever you want. So the Geneva Convention was essentially decided the future of Afghanistan between the communist government in Kabul, Soviet Union, United States, and Pakistan, without Mujahideen. So that sort of thing could be done this time, but for a good reason if they want to do that. That is, bring pressure on Taliban to relent. We don't want them to be out of power. We're not excluding them. We're simply asking them, come part of this proposed solution.
It sounds like they'd have a pretty good chance to run Helmand and Kandahar exactly as they see fit.
Exactly. Not just Kandahar and Helmand, Zabul, the whole Farah,
yeah, Zabul, Uruzgan,
all of those areas, they can run it, and welcome to run it. But let other people also manage their own communities. Hazaras in the center, the Farsi speaking people in Herat, the Uzbeks in the northwest, and the Tajiks and the Pashtuns in Nangarhar, and all these Eastern Pashtuns, they can run their own affairs. Now Rustanis can run their own affairs. This is what I, with a central government, of course, that we're also laying out what the responsibilities and rights of the central government would be. I'm not calling it federal, just central government. So central government will have well-defined rights, privileges, and obligations, and also local governance will be given their own share of responsibilities, powers, and privileges.
You talk about, you mentioned about the United States and having an interest in the future of Afghanistan. And I frankly, I don't think those within the government do. I think a lot of people, and I now, full disclosure, I'm one of the people that wanted to leave Afghanistan, but not because I didn't want to help the people. It's because we had failed for 20 years and I didn't see hitting the reset button to be the solution, because you're talking about another 100 years. And at some point you had to leave, right? But I still care about what happens to the people of Afghanistan. I don't believe those within my own government do.
Oh, I understand that. But we have a vision now, a proposal by Afghans for Afghanistan. Will the United States be willing to help solve a mess that they left behind? Don't we have obligation?
Sure.
For making a mess and leaving it? We did this twice. Once we used Afghanistan against the Soviet Union to end the Cold War, and then abandon them. And then again, 20 years of war, and then giving it back to the enemy and coming back. And then letting the enemy essentially flaunt that we defeated the United States of America. Now, for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, a group of Afghans have come together, proposed a solution. That's an Afghan solution. And we're willing to share this with our own Afghan colleagues and with the international community. And we're inviting the international community this time to help us implement our plan in Afghanistan, not their plans. Why can't you and a lot of other veterans support us in convincing the United States of America's government that, yes, let's help this time. Maybe this will work. Maybe Afghanistan will be coming out of its miseries, and that we would have also met our obligation to the people of Afghanistan.
It's nice to see an Afghan solution for, we always say the Afghan solution for the Afghan problem. It's nice to see one that is, I guess you could call it diplomatic. Right? Usually we talk about it in terms of warfare, in Kandahar or something like that. So this is a great change of pace. And you have in here, you talk about who you guys want at the table and who you don't want at the table, right? And a lot of references to those who were corrupt in the past, your Gulag or Shiraz.
We don't want them to be part of this structure,
right?
No.
So now that my question is, and I completely understand that, and I completely agree with that. Where does that put people like Amrullah Salah, Ahmad Massoud, who's running the NRF. Are they
Ahmad Massoud,
okay?
if he adopts this proposal that proposed, and I've shared it with him,
Okay,
then he is part of the game. He's innocent.
sure. And then like the Afghan Freedom was it AFF, like they would be able to, as long as
Well,
they
look,
adopt or agree to the resolutions, if you will, they can be a part of the process.
anybody who is clean,
Sure.
is willing to be part of the process, they're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, but
No,
not people that are known for being corrupt or have blood stains in their sleeves and have done harm to the country, or people recognize them as traitors. We have traitors amongst our previous government leaders. I mean, Ghani is one of those.
mhm.
And so yes, we're not going to at this point we don't think they have a place in implementing this particular vision for the future of Afghanistan, because the youth would not allow them. Taliban don't want them either. And there are elements within Taliban that we don't want to deal with. But again, it's a decision that, and we have had a proposal on how to get people involved in creating that National Committee for Peace with the help of National Commission for Peace in Afghanistan, and then how that government, the temporary government, the transitional government, needs to be also based on the vote of the public, the recommendations of the public, by province, and so on and so forth, so that we have worked out. It may not work. We want to hear if we want to find solutions to these issues.
Sure.
And we want the country to come out of this very long, almost 45, 50 years of war. That's enough for any country.
Yeah, that's the thing I think about when everything first happened in August. We know Afghans who are still in Afghanistan. I remember talking to them, shooting them a message on social media a month later. I'm like, how are things? Like, well, I mean, not as many people are dying, so there's that. And I feel like a lot of people initially were like, well, let's enjoy the fact that so much fewer people are dying, and then we can address the problems later.
Zach, who was responsible for the dying? The
Oh, so,
Taliban.
of course.
So they, now they think they brought peace. What peace? They brought nothing. They stopped killing people.
Yeah,
they were responsible.
I don't disagree.
So that's why I think it's a fraudulent claim that they brought peace. They brought nothing. They just stopped killing people.
No, I think they brought
They're
oppression.
now in power. So what I hope that your program will do is to introduce this proposal and the idea to the Americans. I haven't really had a chance to speak in English with our own compatriots here in the United States. Yours and the earlier program that you saw are the only two things I've done in English in the last 2.5 years. We need to essentially convince our own politicians in Congress. I hope in the near future I will be in the Hill to speak to people who are sympathetic to helping the Afghans solve their own problems and not to abandon them as we have.
Yes.
And I think you and your colleagues can help us in this effort. And that's why I was very happy to be with you. And maybe we can, if your programs allows, and if people are interested in hearing more, I'm sure they will be in contact with you. I'll be on your side anytime.
Oh, thank you very much. That pretty much wraps up my thoughts and everything. Professor Shahrani, it is our policy that our guest always gets the last word. Thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight to discuss your proposal, this National Trust Movement of Afghanistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Zach. I think, you know, I'm privileged to be with you because you are speaking to a group of our compatriots here in the United States that is probably the most interested in the fate of people in Afghanistan. And a lot of servicemen who did their best over the last 20 years in Afghanistan. I think the country is grateful to them, both here in Afghanistan. You did your best, but I think our politicians failed us. And we should take the opportunity to ask the politicians to not let down the people of Afghanistan and all the servicemen who served in Afghanistan, that we should together try to urge our government in the months and years to come that they should become familiar with our proposal, the National Trust Movement of Afghanistan. I'm happy to share it with anybody, and I hope if your colleagues, friends are interested, please share it with them, and especially anyone you know in the Hill, you know in the government, please share the document with them. And if you think you think this is something that could work, help us make it work. And thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.